When the bell rang, signaling the end of the Chinese exam, I made a mental calculation. My essay had gone well. A score of 130 seemed secure. My name is Lin Mo. This was the most important day of my life, the college entrance exam. But I never expected that when I walked out of the exam hall gates full of hope, what awaited me was not the embrace of my mother, Chen Shu, but a screaming ambulance, and within the police cordon, a white cloth covering a stretcher, a white so blinding it seared my very soul. The June sky was scorching, yet the burning wind that blew against me felt as cold as ice. The whispers of the crowd were like countless steel needles piercing my ears. My God, it's tragic. Right at the entrance of the exam hall, a mother really puts her life on the line for her child's exams. That woman was too vicious. She stabbed her straight through the heart. She was gone instantly. I pushed through the crowd, walking toward that white cloth step by step, like a puppet stripped of its soul. A police officer stopped me, looking at the examinee number on my uniform, his eyes filled with pity. "Kid, don't go over there." I didn't listen to him. My eyes saw only the corner of the red qipao faintly visible beneath the white cloth, the one my mother had worn specially for me this morning. She had said red was auspicious, symbolizing a victory right from the start. But now that red was soaked in blood. My father, Lin Weigua, was kneeling on the ground, supported by others, crying his heart out. He kept repeating, "Ashu, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Beside him stood a woman in a cheap dress, her makeup ruined by tears. She was Zhang Tsuehua, the mistress my father kept on the side. There were still traces of blood on her hands, which were now locked in cold handcuffs. There was not a shred of remorse on her face, only a look of venomous spite and satisfaction. I understood everything. This morning, my mother smiled as she sent me into the exam hall, saying she would be waiting outside the whole time. She said that no matter what, she wouldn't let any filthy people or matters affect the most important exam of my life. So, she used her own body to block Zhang Tsuehua, who had come to provoke a scene. She used her life to guard the final piece of my exam. I walked to the stretcher and slowly crouched down. My trembling hand reached toward the white cloth. "Kid, don't." The officer stopped me again. Ignoring him, I gently lifted a corner of the cloth. It was my mother's face. That incredibly familiar face I had looked at for 18 years. Her eyes were still wide open, seeming to hold a final trace of worry for me. Her face was as pale as paper, yet the corners of her mouth still held that gentle, encouraging smile she had given me when sending me off this morning. Only now, that smile was frozen forever. My mind went blank. My heart felt as if it were being crushed by an invisible hand. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even show any expression. I just gazed at her quietly, and then, in a voice that felt strange even to me, a voice terrifying in its calmness, I said to the police officer beside me, "Sir, I still have a math exam this afternoon." With that, I covered her face again, stood up, turned around, and walked back toward the exam hall. Everyone looked at me as if I were a madman, including my father, and including the murderer, Zhang Tsuehua. I could feel Zhang Tsuehua's venomous gaze behind me, turning into a scrutiny mixed with shock and fear. She didn't understand. A person who can remain indifferent to his mother's tragic death isn't being calm. It is that his heart, in that moment, has died along with the fruit knife that stabbed into his mother's body. What survived was merely a monster of vengeance named Lin Mo. In the afternoon math exam, my pen moved as if possessed. Those complex functions and geometric figures transformed in my eyes into clear maps leading to the road of revenge. From this day on, my life had only one goal remaining. My mother's funeral was hasty and oppressive. The memorial service was held in the smallest hall of the funeral home. The relatives and friends who came to offer condolences wore expressions blending sympathy, regret, and a trace of awkwardness. They looked at me as if I were a porcelain doll on the verge of shattering. Dressed in black mourning clothes, I knelt on the cushion holding my mother's black and white portrait, saying nothing. In the portrait, she smiled so gently, as if she were merely asleep. But I knew she would never again bring me a steaming bowl of late-night snacks while I stayed up studying. My father, Lin Weigua, knelt beside me, his eyes swollen and his appearance haggard. He endlessly recounted his grief and remorse to everyone who came to pay their respects, as if he were the most devoted husband in the world. But I only felt disgusted. If he truly loved my mother, how could he have kept Zhang Tsuehua as a mistress for 5 years? If he truly felt any remorse, how could he be plotting to exonerate that murderer while my mother's body was barely cold? Shout, Mo, you must stay strong. My aunt walked over and strokes my head, tears streaming down her face. Your mother. She had such a hard life. I nodded, remaining silent. The climax of the funeral arrived when Zhang Tsuehua's brother, Zhang Hu, barged in with a group of men. Zhang Hu was a hulking brute of a man, wearing a gold chain around his neck and sporting an over-the-shoulder dragon tattoo on his arm. One look was enough to tell he was a gangster. The moment he stepped through the door, he started shouting, "What are you crying for? She's dead, because you people pushed her to it. My sister said it was that bitch Chen Shu who started it. My sister was just acting in self-defense." Bullshit. My uncle flew into a rage instantly. He charged forward to confront him. A murderer pays with their life. That is the law of nature. How dare you come here and cause a scene? What? You want to fight? Zhang Hu shoved my uncle aside. Pointing at everyone in the morning hall, he cursed arrogantly. I'm telling you all, my sister said she was forced. It was a crime of passion, manslaughter. If any one of you dares to say another word, I'll fucking kill you. The relatives were cowed by his aggression, furious but too afraid to speak up. It was then that my father, Lin Weigua, actually stood up and stepped between Zhang Hu and my uncle. Everyone, calm down, he said with an apologetic smile, turning to my uncle. Brother, please cool off. The police will investigate this thoroughly. I believe the law is just. Then he turned to Zhang Hu, and in a tone that bordered on fawning said, Brother Hu, rest assured. I've already hired the best lawyer in the city for Tsuehua. This matter will definitely have a good outcome. My uncle stared at my father in disbelief, trembling with rage. Lin Weigua, are you even fucking human? Your wife's body is lying right here, and you're actually speaking up for her murderer. A flash of embarrassment crossed my father's face, but he forced himself to continue. I'm doing this so we can resolve things peacefully. Blowing this up won't benefit anyone, and it wouldn't be good for Xiao Mo either. I watched his clumsy performance in silence, my heart turning to ice. He wasn't afraid of how it would affect me. He was afraid of how it would affect himself, his company, and that filthy new home he had with Zhang Tsuehua. Seeing my father submit, Zhang Hu grew even more smug. He walked up to me, looking down condescendingly with a sneer on his face. Kid, you look like the studying type, so let me give you a piece of advice. A wise man submits to circumstances. Don't throw your life away for a dead person. Your dad has figured it out. What about you? I slowly raised my head and looked at his face, which was written all over with arrogance and stupidity. I didn't speak. I just looked at him. My gaze was calm, so calm it didn't ripple in the slightest, like an ancient, bottomless well. Zhang Hu was unsettled by my stare. He took a subconscious step back, cursing under his breath. What are you staring at? You little brat. Let's go. And just like that, the farce came to an end. After the funeral, I held my mother's urn and walked out of the funeral home. The sunlight was blinding, causing me to squint. My father walked over, trying to take the urn from my hands. Shout to Mo, let Dad carry it. I stepped sideways to avoid him. It was the first thing I had said to him since my mother's cremation. Don't touch my mother with your dirty hands. His face instantly turned a deep shade of purple. 1 month later, the college entrance exam results were released. 712 points. This score was high enough to get me into any major at Tsinghua or Peking University. This had been my mother's greatest hope for 18 years. But in my eyes, that inquiry sheet printed with excellent results looked like a massive mockery. I had used my mother's life to exchange for this ticket to a bright future. At the same time, the verdict for Zhang Tsuehua was handed down. My father, true to his word, had used money to pave a road to life for her. In court, that best lawyer portrayed Zhang Tsuehua as a pitiful woman crazy for love, who was verbally abused and beaten in the street by the original wife, and finally accidentally killed the other party in a moment of passion. Meanwhile, my mother, Chen Shu, was turned into an unreasonable shrew who stood in the way of other people's pursuit of happiness. All the evidence favored Zhang Suihua. Several key eyewitnesses at the entrance of the exam venue unanimously testified that it was my mother who struck first. That lethal fruit knife was determined to be something Zhang Suihua just happened to be carrying to peel fruit. My father's company issued a certificate proving Zhang Suihua was mentally unstable. In the end, the court accepted the defense lawyer's argument. Intentional homicide was recharacterized as negligent homicide. And because my father, representing me, voluntarily signed a letter of forgiveness and waived all civil compensation, Zhang Suihua was sentenced to only 3 years in prison. The moment the verdict was announced, I sat in the gallery, and the blood in my veins felt as if it had frozen. I looked at Zhang Suihua in the defendant's dock. She flashed me a triumphant, provocative smile. I looked at my father. He hung his head, not daring to meet my gaze. Clutching my mother's memorial portrait, I walked out of the courthouse. All my relatives swarmed around us, filled with righteous indignation. Is there any justice left in this world? 3 years for murder. Lin Weiguo is a beast. How could he sign that letter of forgiveness? Shout Mo, let's appeal. We'll take this to the provincial authorities. We'll take this to Beijing. I said nothing. I simply held the portrait and walked forward, step by step. I returned to the home that was once filled with laughter, but was now empty and desolate. My father sat on the sofa, his face worn with exhaustion. Xiao Mo, he began, his voice hoarse. I know you hate me, but I have my reasons. The Zhang family. We can't afford to offend them. You're still young. You have a bright future ahead of you. I ignored him and walked straight back to my room. I took out the transcript showing my score of 712 and a pre-admission notice from Tsinghua University, placing them side by side on the desk. Then, I took out another document, the admissions brochure for the People's Public Security University of China. Outside the door, my father continued to ramble, attempting to use his ridiculous logic to justify his shamelessness and cowardice. 3 years will pass quickly. Once you graduate from college, everything will be fine. I promise. I'll make it up to you in the future. I shut the door, locking out his nauseating voice. I looked at the 2 documents on the desk, one leading to the light, the other to darkness. I picked up my pen. While everyone assumed I would sink into despair or choose the safest path, I made my choice. I didn't cry, I didn't make a scene, and I didn't utter a single complaint against this unjust world. Because I knew that tears and screams are merely the final whimpers of the weak. And I was going to become a law-enforcing monster. In front of all my relatives, I tore the Tsinghua application form in shreds. Then, under their shocked gazes, I wrote my name, stroke by stroke, on the application form for the Public Security University. Lin Montag. From this day forth, I will judge the power and money you worship. I will defend the law that you trample upon. 3 years is too short. I will use my entire life to seek true justice for my mother. I will make that woman pay a price for that stab wound that cannot be measured in mere years. I want her dead. In September, as I dragged my suitcase through the gates of the People's Public Security University of China, I knew that a brand new path, filled with thorns and hardships, had unfolded beneath my feet. I was assigned to the Criminal Investigation Major, a cradle for future detectives. At the opening ceremony, the department head spoke passionately from the stage. When you put on this uniform, you shoulder the peace of the nation, the happiness of the people, and the dignity of the law. The students in the audience were boiling with excitement, but I felt only a bone-chilling coldness. The dignity of the law. I had seen with my own eyes how fragile it was in the face of money. For 4 years of college, I lived like an outlier. I was like a tireless machine, frantically absorbing all knowledge related to investigation, interrogation, criminal law, and criminal psychology. My grades in major courses remained unshakably at number 1. Combat, shooting, armed cross-country runs. I tackled these physical training sessions with near-masochistic intensity, constantly challenging my limits. While others complained about the grueling training, I silently increased my own workload. Every moment of exhaustion, every drop of sweat, and every bruise gave me a kind of morbid pleasure, because I knew that every drop of sweat I shed was bringing me one step closer to the truth. Every muscle on my body was honed so that one day I could bring those criminals to justice with my own hands. I barely interacted with anyone. In 4 years, I had no friends and no lovers. My classmates found me withdrawn and cold. They nicknamed me the robot. They didn't know that the soul of a wrongfully deceased person dwelt within my heart. She was my sole motivation and also my heavy shackle. The only person who could exchange a few words with me was our criminal investigation professor, Zhao Lichuan. He was a grizzled, experienced veteran detective who had stepped back from the front lines due to health reasons to teach at the academy. His classes were always teeming with real, cruel cases. What he taught us wasn't just textbook theory, but the most practical wisdom found on the streets and inside interrogation rooms. Once, he lectured on a case of manslaughter committed in the heat of passion, analyzing the loopholes in the chain of evidence and the possibility of human tampering. After class, I approached him for the first time. "Professor Zhao," I said, handing him a file I had compiled myself, containing all the public records and the court verdict regarding my mother's case from 4 years ago. "Could you take a look at this case for me?" Zhao Lichuan pushed up his reading glasses and took the thick stack of documents. He read with immense focus, his frown deepening with every page. An hour later, he finished the files and let out a long sigh. "Son, this case. I had caught wind of it back when I was still at the city bureau." His voice carried a trace of helplessness and anger. Back then, many in the squad felt something was wrong, but the pressure from above was immense. Several key witnesses collectively recanted their testimonies right after giving their initial statements. The only surveillance camera at the scene coincidentally malfunctioned. We were powerless. It turned out he was one of those righteous old detectives who had been suppressed back then. Powerless. I repeated the word, tasting nothing but bitterness. However, a sharp glint flashed in Zhao Lichuan's eyes as he looked at me, enunciating every word. Being powerless doesn't mean the case is airtight. Every lie has a crack. Every concealed truth leaves a trace in some corner. The biggest suspicion in this case lies in how quickly and consistently those witnesses change their stories. There's definitely something going on behind the scenes. His words were like a beacon, illuminating the heavy fog that had suppressed me for 4 years. "Professor, what should I do?" "What you need to do is forge yourself into the sharpest blade." Zhao Lichuan patted my shoulder, his eyes filled with expectation. "Learn everything you need to learn, hone the strongest skills, and then go back to that place. Use the power in your hands to pry open those tightly sealed lips and find those forgotten traces. Remember, procedural justice is the most powerful weapon we police have." From that day on, Zhao Lichuan became my guide, both a mentor and a friend. He passed on his decades of criminal investigation experience to me without reservation. He taught me how to find clues in the most inconspicuous details, how to engage in psychological warfare with the most cunning criminals, and how to use the rules to defeat those who trample upon them. For years, 1,460 days, I never went home once, nor did I make a single call to my father. All my living expenses came from scholarships and work-study programs. At the graduation ceremony, I took the stage as the sole representative of the distinguished graduates. I wore a crisp police uniform, shining epaulets on my shoulders. Down in the audience sat Professor Zhao Lichuan. He looked at me with gratification, tears glimmering in his eyes. My speech was short, consisting of only one sentence. "I will dedicate my life to defending the honor of this uniform, to pursuing every concealed truth, and to bringing peace to every wronged soul." A month later, having ranked first in the written exam, interview, and physical test, I was assigned to the Serious Crimes Unit of the City Criminal Investigation Bureau. On the day I returned, I notified no one. I dragged my suitcase not to my home, but directly to my mother's grave. On the headstone, her smile remained as gentle as ever. I set down my luggage and offered a standard military salute to the headstone, one that was 4 years late. "Mom, I'm back. This time, I am no longer a powerless student. I'm a police officer. Starting today, your case is officially reopened by me, Lin Mo." The archives room of the City Criminal Investigation Bureau was a place where sunlight rarely reached. The air was thick with a mixed scent of old paper and dust. Stored here were the files of every major criminal case in the city from the past 20 years. On my first day of work, I submitted an application to the detachment captain, requesting to review the entire case file of the 0607 Chun-Shu murder case from 4 years ago. The captain was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He glanced at me, his expression complicated. "Linemo, I know who you are. Old Zhao mentioned you to me. Said you're the most talented prospect he's ever seen in his life. But the verdict on this case was finalized years ago. Reopening it now, I'm afraid. Captain, I am not applying as a family member of the victim, but as a criminal investigator," I replied, my tone neither arrogant nor servile. "I have discovered new suspicious points that meet the procedural requirements for reopening an investigation." He remained silent for a long time before finally signing the application form. "All right, but remember, everything has to be done by the book. All I can give you is the key to the archives." "Thank you, Captain." Key in hand, I walked into this dust-sealed graveyard of memories. On the bottom shelf, I found a file box already coated in a thin layer of dust. Opening it, that blood-soaked summer from 4 years ago came rushing back at me in an instant. Crime scene reports, forensic evaluations, witness statements, interrogation records. I turned the pages one by one. Every word was like a knife, slicing into my heart over and over again. But I didn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I forced myself to examine the file from the strictly objective, cool-headed perspective of a criminal investigator. As Professor Zhao used to say, beneath every lie, there's a flaw. Soon, I found a first discrepancy. In the forensic autopsy report, there was a description of the wound. Wound depth 13. 5 centimeters, incision smooth, angle sharp, consistent with a single thrust by a single-edged sharp instrument, piercing the heart and causing death by acute hemorrhage. Yet, in the evidence report for the murder weapon, the fruit knife, the description read, ordinary household stainless steel fruit knife, total length 21 centimeters, blade length 11 centimeters. The blade was only 11 centimeters long. How could it cause a 13.5-centimeter wound? It was a fatal loophole, one that everyone at the time, the medical examiner, the prosecutor, the judge, had overlooked. The only explanation was that Zhang Tsohua had used immense force, plunging the entire knife, along with part of the handle, into my mother's body. This was in no way consistent with the accidental act of a woman in a crime of passion. Such force and depth suggested a reckless, hate-filled, lethal attack. I found a second discrepancy. In Zhang Tsohua's interrogation record, her explanation for buying the fruit knife was, "I bought it at the supermarket the night before to peel apple for my son the next day." The explanation sounded watertight. However, in the evidence photos within the file, I noticed a detail. There was still a supermarket price tag stuck to the handle of the fruit knife. I zoomed in on the photo, then zoomed in again until I could finally make out the string of blurry numbers on the tag, the supermarket's product code. I immediately logged into the police intranet's investigation database and looked up the item information from that supermarket. The code didn't correspond to an ordinary fruit knife, but to a multifunctional outdoor camping knife equipped with a blood groove. Such a knife is sharper and far more lethal than a standard fruit knife. Most critically, its blade length was 14 centimeters. This matched the wound depth in the autopsy report perfectly. Zhang Tsohua had lied. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was premeditated. She had deliberately purchased a more lethal weapon and concealed it, committing murder under the guise of peeling fruit. I found a third discrepancy, and it was the most critical one. It concerned the eyewitnesses who had later collectively changed their testimony, claiming my mother had struck first. The file contained their identity information. One was a vendor selling popsicles outside the exam hall. One was a parent picking up their child, and the third was a nearby sanitation worker. These 3 individuals, with entirely different backgrounds, had used nearly identical language in their second statements, as if reciting from a script, to describe the scene. I entered their personal information into the police big data system for a deep association analysis. A few minutes later, a massive relationship network generated on the screen. The popsicle vendor's son worked as a waiter at a KTV owned by Zhang Hu. The parent's husband ran a small renovation company that had just landed a major contract the previous year. The client was my father, Lin Weigua's company. As for the sanitation worker, his bank account had received an anonymous transfer of 50,000 yuan 3 days after the crime. All the clues pointed to two sources of evil: violent threats from Zhang Hu and financial bribery from my father. Staring at the clear web of connections on the screen, I felt my blood begin to boil. The truth had been hiding right here in this sunless archive room. It hadn't vanished. It was merely covered in dust, and I was the one responsible for blowing that dust away. I compiled all the discrepancies into a 20-page application report for reopening the investigation into the June 7th Qinshu murder case and printed it out. By the time I finished, dawn had broken. I walked out of the archives as the first rays of morning light hit my face. For the first time in 4 years, the sunlight didn't feel so cold. Report in hand, I knocked on the captain's door. "Captain, I've found the devil." After reading my report, the captain remained silent for a full 10 minutes. He smoked cigarette after cigarette, the office filling with a thick haze. Finally, he crushed his cigarette but fiercely into the ashtray, raised his head, and looked at me, his gaze more solemn than I had ever seen it. "Lin Mo, do you know what it means if we submit this report?" "I know," I replied calmly. "It means we have to overturn a verdict that went into effect 4 years ago. It means we are challenging not just a murderer, but a web of connections woven from money and violence. It means we may face immense resistance, perhaps even danger. Are you afraid?" "I am only afraid that the truth will never see the light of day. I am only afraid that my mother will not find peace in the afterlife." The captain stared into my eyes for a long time, as if trying to see through to my soul. Finally, he took a seal from his drawer and stamped it heavily onto my report. "Approved." He stood up, walked over to me, and patted my shoulder. "However, the Major Crimes Unit is short-staffed. I can only assign one veteran comrade to assist you. One is enough." "Go on, then. Remember, you are a police officer. Everything depends on evidence. Do not let hatred blind your eyes." "Yes, sir." The veteran comrade the captain assigned to me was none other than my mentor, Zhao Lichuan. He had already retired, but was brought back by the captain under the title of re-employed expert consultant. When I saw Professor Zhao sitting in my office dressed in plain clothes, I froze. "Professor, that brat of a captain called me for half the night. He said he's got a reckless young fool under his command who insists on poking a hornet's nest. He was worried, so he asked this old bone to come back and hold the fort for you." Professor Zhao said with a smile, though his eyes were slightly moist. "Good lad, you haven't disappointed me." With Professor Zhao as my anchor, my heart finally settled. We established the 0607 Special Task Force. In the office, it was just the two of us. The first step was to locate the real murder weapon. Based on my deduction, the weapon Zhang Sawai used to commit the crime was a 14-centimeter outdoor knife, while the one handed over to the police was a different 11-centimeter ordinary fruit knife. It was a carefully orchestrated bait-and-switch. So, where was the real murder weapon? How would a murderer who has killed someone and deliberately plotted to escape justice dispose of a blood-stained weapon? Professor Zhao asked me. "Either destroy it or hide it in a place where it absolutely won't be discovered," I replied. "The best way to destroy it is smelting, but that's too difficult. Therefore, the probability of it being hidden is higher," Professor Zhao analyzed. "Where would she hide it? At home? Too liable to be searched. A landfill? Too easy to be found. She would choose a place that she considers the safest, the most significant, or perhaps one that even gives her a sense of twisted pleasure." A spark flashed in my mind, and a location emerged. After her release from prison, Zhang Suat didn't live with her brother, Zhang Hu, nor did she live in the house my father had bought for her. Instead, she returned to the place where she first met my father, an old, dilapidated neighborhood called Happiness Lane. That was where their affair began. Professor Zhao and I immediately applied for a search warrant. When we, accompanied by 2 young officers, kicked open the door to Zhang Sua's rental unit, she was leisurely applying a face mask and watching television. 3 years of imprisonment didn't seem to have left much of a mark on her. On the contrary, thanks to the hefty compensation fees my father deposited into her account every month, she was living even more comfortably than before. "What are you doing? What gives you the right to barge into my home?" Seeing our uniforms, she froze for a moment before flying into a rage. I ignored her, directly displaying the search warrant, and said coldly, "Zhang Zhua, we suspect you were involved in a homicide case from 4 years ago. We are now lawfully conducting a search of your residence." "What homicide? That case was closed ages ago." "On what grounds?" she screamed, attempting to block us. But it was all in vain. Professor Zhao and I began a carpet search of the small apartment, which was less than 40 square meters. Under the bed, on top of the wardrobe, the toilet tank. We searched every possible hiding spot, but found nothing. The look of smug satisfaction on Zhang Suihua's face grew more intense. "Officer, I told you you're looking in the wrong place. Shall I treat you to a cup of tea before you leave?" Professor Zhao's gaze landed on an inconspicuous potted plant in the corner of the wall. It was a pot of half-dead pothos. He walked over and tapped the side of the flower pot. The sound was dull. He glanced back at me. I understood immediately. I stepped forward and lifted the entire pot of pothos. It was heavy. I dumped all the soil onto a plastic sheet that had been laid out beforehand. Deep within the compacted soil, which reeked of rot, a long object wrapped tightly in a plastic bag was revealed. In that instant, Zhang Zuihua's face turned as pale as a sheet. I put on my gloves and carefully opened the bag. Inside was a knife. It was an outdoor knife with a fuller. The handle was slightly rusted, but the blade still glinted with a cold light. Where the handle met the blade, we extracted a trace of a dried, blackened substance suspected to be blood. I held up the evidence bag, walked over to Zhang Zuihua, and showed her the knife. "Zhang Zuihua, do you recognize this?" She stared at the knife, her body trembling uncontrollably, muttering over and over, "No, it wasn't me. This isn't mine." I knew that the first crack had appeared in her psychological defenses. Her crime of passion, that passion meticulously disguised for 4 years, was finally having its cold, poisonous premeditation exposed to the light of day. 7. After securing the key physical evidence, Professor Zhao and I immediately sent it to the City Bureau's Forensics Department for analysis. The results came back quickly, and they were encouraging. First, the trace blood extracted from the knife was confirmed via DNA matching to belong to my mother, Qinshu. Second, the model of the knife matched perfectly with the product code I had traced from the supermarket. The blade length was 14 centimeters. Third, and most crucially, our colleagues in forensics extracted a partial fingerprint from a crevice in the handle. Incomplete, but sufficient for comparison. This fingerprint did not belong to Zhang Zuihua. Professor Zhao and I immediately ran the print through the database. The result that popped up on the screen shocked us both. The fingerprint belonged to Zhang Hu. It seems this wasn't just a bait-and-switch. It was a joint crime. Professor Zhao's gaze sharpened. Zhang Hu didn't just help his sister dispose of the murder weapon. He might have even directly participated in planning the murder. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. I spoke coldly. They thought they had committed the perfect crime, unaware that the closest accomplices often leave the deadliest traces. Now that the chain of evidence was beginning to take shape, it was time to pay a visit to those eyewitnesses from years ago. We started by finding that popsicle vendor. He wasn't selling popsicles anymore. He had used that hush money to open a small convenience store. When we flashed our badges, the smile on his face instantly froze. "Officers, is there something wrong?" Professor Zhao didn't cut straight to the chase. Instead, he made small talk, chatting about how the man's son was doing. "I heard your son is working as the lobby manager at Dynasty KTV now. Young and successful. That's impressive." At the mention of his son, a trace of pride appeared on the vendor's face, but it was quickly replaced by wariness. Dynasty KTV was one of the main businesses owned by Zhang Hu, a seedy gray zone harboring all manner of filth. "Yeah, the boy. He's done all right for himself. We're investigating a case recently involving Dynasty KTV." Professor Zhao's tone remained flat. "It involves organized prostitution and drug trafficking. Zhang, who is our primary target. We now suspect that your son is involved as well." "Impossible. Absolutely impossible." The vendor became agitated. "My son is an honest, law-abiding boy. How could he do something like that? Whether he's honest or not isn't up to you." I took out a photograph and slid it across to him. In the photo, his son was in a KTV private room, selling a packet of white powder to a customer. Our undercover officer took this. We have physical evidence and witnesses. You tell me, how many years do you think he'll get? The vendor stared at the photo as if struck by lightning, then went limp and slumped back into his chair. We didn't come here today for your son. Professor Zhao's tone softened. We're here to give you a chance for your son to earn credit for major meritorious service. 4 years ago, at the trial for the 0607 case, why did you commit perjury? The vendor's psychological defenses collapsed completely. Holding his head in his hands, he wept bitterly and revealed everything about what had happened back then. After the incident, Zhang had found him and threatened his son's future and safety, forcing him to give a statement based on a prepared script. In accordance with the law, we took a new statement from him and had him sign a non-disclosure agreement. Using the same method, we broke down the psychological defenses of the other 2 witnesses. As for the female parent, we discovered that her husband's company had engaged in serious corner-cutting and tax evasion during a joint project with my father's company. For the sanitation worker, we simply slammed the record of that 50,000 yuan transfer right in front of him. Within 3 days, 3 brand-new statements, overturning the perjury from back then, were laid neatly on my desk. All the evidence pointed to Zhang Hu. It was time to close the net, but we didn't make a move on Zhang Hu immediately, because I knew Zhang Hu was just a dog, a vicious hound that bit people on someone else's command. What I wanted was to break the spine of the master standing behind him, and that master was my own biological father, Lin Weigua. Over the past 4 years, his business had grown larger and larger. Capitalizing on my mother's death, he had thoroughly rid himself of the shackles of the wife who had shared his hardships. He lived openly with Zhang Tsuohua and had taken Zhang Hu under his wing, putting him in charge of the company's dirty work that could never see the light of day. He was now a renowned cultured merchant and philanthropist in the city. He thought time had washed everything away. I applied for a tax investigation order and an audit of my father, Lin Weigua's company accounts. The grounds were that the company was suspected of providing financial support and money laundering channels for Zhang Hu's organized crime syndicate. This application met with unprecedented resistance. Leaders from the municipal bureau even personally called the detachment captain, telling him to handle it with caution. But the captain withstood all the pressure. He said only one thing: I trust my men. When colleagues from the Tax Bureau and the Economic Crime Investigation Division appeared in Lin Weigua's luxurious office with a search warrant, the shock and astonishment on his face could be imagined. He never could have imagined that the son who had knelt silently in the morning hall all those years ago would declare war on him in this manner. Box after box of his company's ledgers were hauled away. I knew that inside them, every single entry was written in my mother's blood. The operation to tear away the good man mask my father wore had officially begun, and beneath that mask lay a filthy soul, rotten to the core. My colleagues in economic crime investigation worked with extreme efficiency. In Lin Weigua's seemingly flawless ledgers, they soon found traces of impropriety. Massive amounts of company funds had flowed into a dozen shell companies under the guise of project consulting fees and public relations expenses. And the actual controller of these shell companies, without exception, pointed to the same person, Zhang Hu. It was a clear chain of interest funneling lifeblood to criminal forces. Lin Weigua was in charge of making money, while Zhang Hu used violence and intimidation to flatten any obstacles in the business world for him. Colluding together, the two had built a business empire that straddled both the lawful and the lawless worlds. Even more critically, we found a breakthrough in a legal consulting fee totaling 3 million yuan. This money was paid to the law firm that had defended Zhang Tsuohua, and the payment was made right after the first instance verdict in my mother's case. The sum far exceeded normal legal fees. It wasn't a defense fee. It was hush money and a thank you payment. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, my father, Lin Weigua, was criminally detained in accordance with the law. I personally participated in his first interrogation. In the interrogation room, stripped of his designer suit and wearing a gray prison uniform, he seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. He looked at me sitting opposite him in my police uniform, his eyes filled with complex emotions, anger, confusion, but mostly a genuine, visceral fear. Lin Montauk. No, Officer Lin. He spoke, his voice hoarse. Did you really have to go this far? I am your father, after all. The moment you chose to protect the murderer while my mother lay in a pool of blood, you ceased to be. My voice was colder than the harsh lights of the interrogation room. Lin Weigwa, what I'm asking you today is not about personal grievances between a father and son, but about matters of law. What is your relationship with Zhang Hu? We were just normal business partners. He was still being stubborn. Business partners? I slammed a stack of bank statements and transfer records down in front of him. You funnel tens of millions into his company every year, having him handle demolition disputes and attack your business rivals for you. Is that also normal business cooperation? As he looked at the evidence, his face turned paler and paler. 4 years ago, did you pay hush money to those witnesses? Did you use your money and connections to turn intentional homicide into manslaughter in the heat of passion? I pressed him at every step. Every question was like a sledgehammer, smashing against his crumbling psychological defenses. I didn't, he shouted in agitation. I just wanted things to blow over. I did it all for your own good. Lin and Mo, I was afraid you'd be dragged into this. For my own good? I sneered, standing up and walking over to him, looking down from above. For my own good, you'd let my mother die without justice? For my own good, you'd let a murderer walk free? Lin Weigwa, your hypocritical speech might fool others, but it won't fool me. You were never afraid of me getting hurt. You were afraid of Zhang Hu exposing your dirty laundry. You were afraid your precious company's stock price would plummet because of his scandal. In your eyes, my mother's life, your own flesh and blood, and even the dignity of the law don't measure up to your filthy money, do they? My voice wasn't loud, but every word struck like a slap across his face. His mental defenses collapsed completely. He slumped over the table, a man in his 40s, wailing like a child. I was wrong. Lin Montauk, Dad was really wrong. Just forgive me this once. I beg you. I watched him silently, feeling not a ripple of emotion, let alone any satisfaction. I just found it pathetic. This man was cowardly, selfish, and hypocritical to the bone. For the sake of profit, he would abandon his wife, shield a murderer, and even grovel before his own son. Save your repentance for my mother's tombstone. I turned around and walked out of the interrogation room. Professor Zhao was waiting for me outside. He handed me a bottle of water. How do you feel? I don't feel anything. I unscrewed the cap and took a large gulp. I just think, my mother's life was such a waste. Silly boy, Professor Zhao sighed. In this world, when it comes to matters of the heart, there is no such thing as worth it or not. Your mother simply loved the wrong person. Now, what you are doing is bringing her peace. That makes it worth it. I nodded. With his defenses breached, Lin Weigwa spilled everything. He admitted to buying off witnesses and bribing relevant personnel to exonerate Zhang Suwa. A massive web of corruption, covering parts of the city's political and legal systems, began to surface. The Municipal Bureau and the Discipline Inspection Commission immediately established a joint investigation team. A political earthquake was inevitable. As for me, armed with Lin Weigwa's confession and the recovery of the actual murder weapon, I formally applied to the Procuratorate for Zhang Hu's arrest. The first prey was about to be ensnared. I knew that once I snapped this hardest thong of the Zhang family, I would be one step closer to the ultimate truth. The operation to capture Zhang Hu commenced in the early hours of the next day. According to an informant, he was at his own Dynasty KTV, partying through the night with his cronies. I led a SWAT team, descending like a strike force from the heavens, and sealed off all exits. When the officers kicked open the door to the private suite, decorated like a palace, the people inside were still lost in their hedonistic stupor. Music, screams, and the sound of shattering bottles mingled into chaos. Zhang Hu reacted quickly. He grabbed an ashtray from the table, intending to fight back. But I was faster. With a sudden lunge and a clean, decisive grappling move, I twisted the arm bearing his over-the-shoulder dragon tattoo behind his back. I pinned his bulk of over 180 pounds firmly to the floor, rendering him immobile. Zhang Hu, you are under arrest for intentional injury, organizing prostitution, engaging in mob brawls, and picking quarrels and provoking trouble. I slapped the cold handcuffs onto his wrists. He struggled, spewing filth from his mouth. Fuck you. Do you know who I am? My brother-in-law is Lin Weigua. Your brother-in-law is in the interrogation room next door right now, repenting for his sins. I replied coldly. After being brought back to the station, Zhang, whose arrogance remained undiminished. He assumed that, just like 4 years ago, he would soon be fished out. Inside the interrogation room, he sat with his legs crossed, looking completely, shamelessly defiant. Officer, if you have something to say, spit it out. I'm a busy man. I don't have time to waste with you. I ignored him and simply slid a file across the table in front of him. These are some interesting things we found in your KTV's ledgers, I said calmly. For instance, every month, you send a labor fee to Deputy Director Liu of the South City Precinct. And for another, half of the princesses in your establishment are underage girls you control through illegal lending. Zhang, whose expression shifted slightly. I continued, of course, those are just the appetizers. What we are truly interested in is this. I placed a photograph of the outdoor knife, bearing his fingerprints, in front of him. 4 years ago, on June 7th at 2:00 p.m., you were holding this knife when you appeared with your sister, Zhang Tsuehua, at the entrance of the City No. 1 high school exam center. Is that correct? Zhang, whose pupils constricted sharply. The composure on his face finally began to crumble. I don't know what you're talking about. I was playing cards with friends that day. He was still trying to deny it. Playing cards? We checked your call records from that day. At 1:30 p.m., you spoke with your sister for 3 minutes and 20 seconds. At 2:15 p.m., after the incident took place, you spoke with her again for 1 minute and 50 seconds. What? Were you too busy orchestrating a murder from the card table? That's a vicious lie. We don't just have phone records. We have witnesses. I slapped 3 fresh witness statements onto the table in front of him. They're all willing to testify that you were the one who threatened their families to force them into perjury back then. Zhang Hu, you thought your plan was flawless, but you forgot one thing. There are no secrets in this world that remain hidden forever. Zhang Hu stared at the evidence, cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He knew that this time he was done for. Confession is your only way out. Professor Zhao interjected at just the right moment. Your sister, Zhang Tsuehua, has already pushed all the responsibility onto you. She claims you bought the knife, you told her to stab the victim, and the whole idea was yours. She says you are the mastermind. What? Zhang, who shot up from his seat, his handcuffs rattling. That bitch. She wouldn't dare. Professor Zhao's words were a tactical interrogation technique, but they were also the truth. When we questioned Zhang Tsuehua, the moment she heard Zhang, who had been arrested, she immediately dumped all the blame on her brother. These siblings, who seemed so devoted to each other, revealed their most selfish and ugly sides in the face of disaster. She will do anything to save herself, Professor Zhao continued. If you keep holding out, you'll go down as the sole mastermind of this premeditated murder. Death penalty or life imprisonment. The choice is yours. The words death penalty struck like a heavy hammer, completely shattering Zhang Hu's psychological defenses. He slumped back into his chair, his eyes losing focus, muttering incessantly. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. She wanted to go herself. It was all her. Over the next few hours, Zhang Hu, a local tyrant who had bullied his way through the last decade, spilled everything like beans from a jar. It turned out that on the day of the crime, Zhang Sa was filled with resentment because my father was dragging his feet on divorcing my mother. Learning from Zhang Hu that my mother waited outside the exam hall for me every day, a vicious plan took shape in her mind. She didn't just want to provoke, she wanted to make a definitive statement. Zhang Hu didn't try to stop her. Instead, he offered an even more venomous idea. He gave her the outdoor knife, which was far more lethal, and instructed her that if a conflict arose, she should stab non-vital areas to cause minor injuries. This, he reasoned, would scare my mother and force my father to finally commit to the divorce. But they both underestimated Zhang Tsuehua's malice. Once she had a knife, she never intended to leave anyone alive. She wanted to permanently remove the stumbling block that prevented her from becoming the official wife. After the incident, Zhang Hu leveraged all his connections to work with my father, weaving a massive web of lies. They disguised a premeditated murder as an accidental crime of passion. With that, the first prey was completely ensnared. Zhang Hu's criminal syndicate was uprooted, and what awaited him was the harshest judgment of the law. As for me, holding his written confession, I turned my gaze toward the final and central target, Zhang Tsuo. It was time to make her pay the true price for that stab she delivered all those years ago. When Zhang Tsuo was brought back to the interrogation room, the arrogance and composure on her face had vanished. In their place was a hysterical madness. "On what grounds are you arresting me? The case was closed long ago. This is illegal detention. I'm going to sue you." She slammed the table and started screaming the moment she walked in. I watched her silently, as if watching a pathetic clown. Only when she had tired herself out did I slide a document in front of her. "This is your brother Zhang Hu's confession," I said calmly. "He has admitted to everything, including how he provided you with a weapon, how he instigated you to harm my mother, and how he helped you forge evidence and threaten witnesses afterward." Zhang Tsuo stared at the confession, which was signed repeatedly by Zhang Hu, and the color drained from her face. "Impossible. He wouldn't betray me. It seems you don't know your dear brother as well as you thought." I pulled out another document. This is a list of all assets under his name. In order to receive a reduced sentence, he voluntarily offered to surrender all illegal gains. Furthermore, he is willing to turn state's witness and testify that you are the true mastermind behind the 0607 case. Zhang Tsuo's body began to tremble violently. The backer she relied on most had not only fallen, but at the final moment, he had turned around to deal her the most fatal blow. "No, it wasn't me. It was him. He forced me to go." She began to frantically cast the blame back on him. The knife was his. The idea was his. I was just used by him. I'm the victim. I looked coldly at her performance, my heart entirely unmoved. "Victim." I stood up, walked over to her, and slammed the photo of the 14-centimeter outdoor knife, the physical evidence, heavily onto the table. My mother's autopsy report shows the wound depth was 13.5 centimeters. That depth almost penetrated her entire chest cavity. "You call that a slip of the hand? You call that being forced?" My voice wasn't loud, but every word pierced her heart like an ice pick. Could a normal woman, in the heat of passion, possess such strength and strike at such a precise angle? "Zhang Tsuo, stop acting. Your shabby performance might have fooled those who were blinded 4 years ago, but it can't fool me now." I threw the pieces of evidence in front of her one by one. These are the news statements from 3 witnesses recanting their perjury. This is the supermarket surveillance footage of you purchasing the murder weapon. And these are the transfer records between you and my father, Lin Weigua, totaling $100,000 a month after your release from prison. You call this compensation? This is hush money. Zhang Tsuo looked at the mountain of irrefutable, ironclad evidence piled on the table, and her psychological defenses crumbled inch by inch. She finally stopped denying it. Instead, she raised her head and stared at me with a look of extreme, venomous resentment. "Yes, I killed her. So what?" Her voice became shrill and distorted. "Chen Shu, that bitch, she deserved to die. She occupied the position of Mrs. Lin and wouldn't let go. She ruined my happiness. I just wanted to kill her. Not only did I want to kill her, but I also wanted to do it on the most important day for you and your mother. I wanted to make you, Lin Mo, live in pain for the rest of your life." "Ha ha ha." She laughed maniacally, the sound echoing through the interrogation room, piercing and grotesque. I watched her quietly, allowing her to vent the most vicious malice in her heart. Only when she had laughed enough did I slowly speak my final words. "You're wrong." My voice was soft, yet it brought her laughter to an abrupt halt. "You didn't ruin me. You only ruined yourself. I won't live in pain, because starting today, I will watch with my own eyes as you march toward hell. I will watch you be sent back to court. I will watch you be sentenced to death. I will watch you pay the heaviest price for what you did back then. As for me, I will carry my mother's expectations and live on well. I will live better than you, longer than you, and with more value than you. That is my most ruthless revenge against you." With that, I didn't spare her another glance. I turned and walked out of the interrogation room. Behind me, her completely broken, gut-wrenching screams and curses erupted. I knew that this battle between good and evil, which had lasted for 4 years, was drawing to a close. What awaited her was the ultimate judgment of the law. After handing over all the evidence to the prosecutor's office, the first thing I did was visit my father, Lin Weigua. He had been formally arrested on suspicion of bribery, money laundering, harboring criminals, and multiple other charges. A long life in prison awaited him. In the detention center meeting room, separated by a thick layer of glass, I saw him. He was wearing a prisoner's uniform, his hair mostly white. He looked as if his spirit had been drained away. His back was stooped, and his eyes were cloudy. He picked up the phone, looked at me, his lips trembling for a long time before he could utter a sentence. Xiao Mo, are you okay? I'm fine, I reply, my tone calm. The company is finished. I'm finished too. He smiled bitterly, tears streaming down his face. Retribution, it's all retribution. I failed you, and I failed your mother even more. It's too late to say that now. Yes, too late, he muttered to himself. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, he looked up and spoke to me with urgency. Xiao Mo, Dad begs you for one last thing. Could you plead with the judge? Ask them to show leniency? Dad doesn't want to die in prison. I watched him quietly, looking at this man who, even at the very last moment, was still calculating for his own sake. I did not answer his question. Instead, I asked him something that had been buried in my heart for 4 years. Back then, when Mom was lying in a pool of her own blood, what were the last words she said to you? I remembered that when I arrived at the scene, he was holding Mom, and her lips were still moving. Lin Weigua's body trembled violently. His expression twisted into one of extreme pain and inner conflict. He choked on his words, unable to continue. Speak. My tone brooked no argument. He closed his eyes, and 2 murky tears rolled down from the corners of his wrinkled eyes. She said, Weigua, don't blame Tsuehua. She's still young. And don't tell little Mo. Let him focus on his exams. Boom! It felt as if something had instantly exploded inside my brain. I had always assumed that in her final moments, Mom would have been filled with resentment and grievance. I never could have imagined that at the very end of her life, she was still thinking of her good-for-nothing husband and the son whose fate was about to be decided. She was even pleading for the woman who killed her. My heart felt as though it had been seared by a red-hot branding iron. For the first time in 4 years, I felt a pain that tore at my very soul. Fighting back the tears threatening to burst forth, I spoke into the phone, articulating every word. Lin Weigua, listen to me. You do not deserve her forgiveness. And you certainly do not deserve mine. Every single day you spend in prison, you remember this. Remember how you betrayed her. Remember how she sacrificed her life for you. You carry that guilt, and you live with it in there. Live a long life. With that, I hung up the phone and walked out of the visitation room without looking back. I found a deserted corner where I could finally no longer hold it in. I squatted down, buried my head deep in my arms, and wept uncontrollably like a lost child. Mom, how could you be so foolish? How could you be so kind? Rest assured, your kindness will not be in vain. Your blood was not shed for nothing. The world that hurt you, your daughter. No, your son has cleaned it up for you. During his time in the detention center, my father, Lin Weigua, seemed to have truly repented. He voluntarily confessed to more hidden crimes, including a crucial clue I had never anticipated. It turned out that the reason he was able to bribe his way through so smoothly back then was due to a key protective umbrella behind the scenes, Yang Jianxin, the deputy chief prosecutor of the city procuratorate. Yang Jianxin was from the same hometown as Lin Weigua, and the two shared a close personal relationship. Back then, it was Yang Jianxin operating behind the scenes, abusing his power to influence the classification and trial process of the case, which allowed Zhang Tsuehua to receive a lenient sentence. The price Lin Weigua paid was a 10% stake in the company and a luxury villa in the suburbs. This clue was like a bombshell that shook the entire task force. We realized that we were no longer facing a simple criminal case, but a widespread web of judicial corruption. With the full support of the City Bureau leadership and the Discipline Inspection Commission, a net was quietly cast to catch Yang Jianxin. However, Yang Jianxin was an old fox with a keen sense of smell. He seemed to sense the danger and began destroying evidence, preparing to flee the country. We were running out of time. Just when we were at our wits' end, an unexpected witness contacted me voluntarily. It was the top-tier lawyer who had defended Zhang Suihua back then, Lawyer Wang. Officer Lin. His voice over the phone carried a trace of exhaustion and resolve. I know you're investigating Yang Jianxin. There are some things that I think it's time I handed over to you. We met in a private room at a cafe. Lawyer Wang handed me a voice recorder. This contains recordings of all my phone conversations with Yang Jianxin from back then. He said, back then, I took Lin Weigua's money and bowed to Yang Jianxin's pressure to do things that went against my conscience. Over the past few years, I haven't had a single night of peaceful sleep. Now, I want to put an end to it all. Why are you doing this? I asked. He gave a bitter smile and said, I have a daughter, too. She's taking the college entrance exam this year. I understood. It was his conscience as a father that led him to make this final choice. This voice recorder became the final straw that broke Yang Jianxin. The recordings clearly documented how Yang Jianxin instructed him to distort the facts, how to exploit legal loopholes to exonerate Zhang Suihua, and the filthy exchange of interest between them. That very night, the investigation team from the Provincial Discipline Inspection Commission apprehended Yang Jianxin in the airport's VIP lounge just as he was preparing to board a flight out of the country. With this, the final and largest dark cloud looming over the injustice of my mother's case was completely dispelled. From Zhang Suihua to Zhang Hu to Lin Weigua and finally to Yang Jianxin. Not a single culprit connected to this case had escaped. The net of justice, for years late, had finally tightened. The date for the retrial was set for a morning in late autumn. A throng of media reporters had gathered at the entrance of the courthouse. This 4-year-old cold case had become the focus of national attention due to the shocking corruption it had exposed. I was not wearing my police uniform. Instead, I wore a black suit and sat in the plaintiff's seat. Today, my identity was not that of a police officer, but simply the only son of the victim, Chen Shu. In the defendant's dock, Zhang Suihua wore a prison uniform, shackled hand and foot. Her hair was withered and yellow, her eyes glazed and dull. The past few months of prison life had completely destroyed her spirit. She was no longer that domineering, arrogant woman. She had withered into a haggard prisoner. Lin Weigua and Zhang Hu also appeared in the dock as accomplices. They hung their heads, daring not to look at me, nor at each other. The trial began. The prosecutor read an indictment spanning dozens of pages, detailing the full facts of the crimes. Zhang Suihua's premeditated murder, as well as the harboring, perjury, and bribery committed by Lin Weigua, Zhang Hu, and the others. The evidence was presented piece by piece. The 14-centimeter-long murder weapon. The testimonies of 3 witnesses recanting their false statements. The handwritten confessions of Zhang Hu and Lin Weigua. The evidence of Yang Jianxin's corruption and the recordings from Lawyer Wang. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, Zhang Suihua's defense attorney was left almost speechless. When it was my turn, as the victim's family, to make a final statement, I stood up. The entire courtroom fell instantly silent. All lenses and all eyes were focused on me. I did not look at the people in the defendant's dock. My gaze drifted through the courtroom windows, looking out at the gray, overcast sky. 4 years ago, it was a season just like this one. My mother, Chen Shu, an ordinary woman who loved her child, fell in a pool of blood. She did nothing wrong. She simply wanted her son to be able to finish the most important exam of his life in peace. My voice was calm, but I could sense my uncle and aunt sitting behind me beginning to sob. In the final moments of her life, she held no resentment, spoke no curses. Her thoughts were still with the person hurting her and with her beloved son. Today, I stand here not for revenge, because I know that no punishment, however severe, can bring my mother back. I stand here for the truth, for justice, and to let everyone know that the dignity of the law cannot be trampled upon. Anyone who attempts to use money and power to cover up their crimes will, in the end, be nailed to the pillar of shame in history. I have finished my statement. I sat down. The presiding judge struck the gavel. As he read the verdict, My heart was calmer than it had ever been. Defendant Zhang Hu, guilty of harboring criminals, organizing, and leading a mafia-style organization. Combined punishment for multiple crimes, sentenced to 25 years of imprisonment. Defendant Lin Weigua, guilty of bribery and harboring criminals. Combined punishment for multiple crimes, sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment. Defendant Zhang Suihua, guilty of intentional homicide. The facts of the crime are clear, the evidence is reliable and sufficient, and her actions constitute the crime of intentional homicide. The motive was despicable, the means cruel, and the social impact extremely vile. In accordance with the law, she shall be severely punished. I hold my breath. Defendant Zhang Suihua is sentenced to death with immediate execution. Death penalty. When those words fell clearly from the presiding judge's lips, the entire courtroom first plunged into absolute silence, then erupted in a wave of suppressed, relieved applause. I saw Zhang Suihua in the dock collapse as if her bones had been removed upon hearing the verdict, followed by a despairing, beast-like wail. Lin Weigua and Zhang Hu, their faces ashen, were led out of the courtroom by the bailiffs. I had waited for years. For the sake of those words, I had transformed from a naive teenager into a meticulous detective. I gave up an easy path and chose the most rugged, lonely road imaginable. I thought that when this moment finally arrived, I would be ecstatic, that I would laugh aloud or shed tears. But I didn't. There was only a vast emptiness in my heart. The thrill of vengeance lasted only a fleeting instant, followed immediately by a deeper, heavier sense of exhaustion and nothingness. I walked out of the courthouse. Reporters surged toward me like a tide, aiming their microphones and cameras at my face. Officer Lin, are you satisfied with the verdict? How did you get through these past 4 years? What would you like to say right now? I didn't answer a single question. I simply pushed my way through the crowd and walked forward in silence. Professor Zhao was waiting for me at the courthouse entrance. He walked over, took off his overcoat, and draped it over my shoulders. Let's go, son, he said. It's all over. I nodded. Yes, it was all over. Zhang Suihua was dead, and Lin Weigua and Zhang, who had received the punishment they deserved. Those corners stained by money and power had been scrubbed clean. In my own way, I had defended the dignity of the law and brought peace to my mother's spirit in heaven. But my mom, she could never come back. The woman who would cook me a bowl of noodles when I stayed up late. The woman who would be happy for an entire day over my smallest progress. The woman who used all her love to hold up the sky for me. She had left me. Forever. I had won the world, but I had lost her for all eternity. A week later, Zhang Suihua's death sentence was ratified and carried out immediately. On the day of the execution, the weather was fine, a crisp, clear autumn day. I took the day off. I didn't go to witness the final act. Instead, I went alone to my mother's gravesite. I bought a bouquet of her favorite lilies and placed them gently before the headstone. On the stone, her smile was as warm as the autumn sunshine. I sat down leaning against the headstone and took something from my chest pocket, carefully wrapped in a craft paper envelope. I opened it. Inside was the admission letter from Tsinghua University, the one I had torn to shreds, then painstakingly taped back together, piece by piece. It still bore the tear stains from 4 years ago. Mom, I've come to see you, I whispered, as if she were still right beside me. The case is closed. The bad guys have been punished. You can rest in peace now. I've lived well these past 4 years. Although it was tiring, it was worth it. I became a good cop. I didn't bring you shame. Oh, right, I forgot to tell you. I got into Tsinghua. I scored 712 points. See? Isn't your son amazing? I held up the acceptance letter and smiled at the photo on the headstone. But as I smiled, the tears began to flow uncontrollably. I took out a lighter and lit one corner of the letter. The flame rose from the paper, slowly devouring the golden lettering. Mom, you always hoped I'd get into the best university and have the brightest future. This acceptance letter was your dream, and mine too. Now, I'm burning it for you. Be proud of me up there in heaven, okay? The firelight reflected on my face, illuminating my tear-stained cheeks. The letter soon turned to ash. A breeze picked up, carrying the black ashes into the distance. It was as if my mother had received this belated gift. I stood up, wiped away my tears, and took one last, deep look at my mother's gentle smile on the headstone. Then, I turned and walked down the mountain. The sunlight cast my shadow long behind me. I knew that starting tomorrow, I would take off these heavy morning clothes and put my crisp police uniform back on. This city holds more truths waiting for me to uncover. There is more justice waiting for me to uphold. And I will carry my mother's inextinguishable love and expectations, walking firmly forward, until the day my life ends. I think when that time comes, I will be able to go to heaven and proudly say to her, "Mom, I didn't let you down. In this life, I have a clear conscience, and I was worthy of this uniform."